motivation, difficulty sleeping. All that's very common to both bipolar and that. So most of the time we're confronted with dealing with the depressed phase and keeping them compliant with treatment and a euphoric. But then occasionally you get the really challenging state when they're manic. In fact, my colleague next door was at his wit's end because in spring and summer, it's just come to Chicago, all the manics stopped their medications or whatever, and he was being driven mad himself, almost having to deal with all the problems his manic patients were causing him. So, any other questions along those lines?
No, that's helpful.
Yeah.
You
can actually have one other final point on that. Maybe 5% of the time, people are in a mixed state where they present with both manic, hypomanic especially symptoms, and depressed symptoms at the same time. They're high, but they tell you how lousy they feel, how hopeless they feel. But they're doing it with the rapid speech and the aggressiveness and not having the need for sleep of a manic phase. Okay, so we have the mixed mania depression phase. And that's a very tough state to deal with. A lot of those people wind up with ECT.
Got it. Thanks so much. That's very helpful overview. Can we do the same exercise as we did for MDD and just the percentage of patients that go to different sites of care?
Yeah. Again, it's going to depend on the social class, but very often the initial approach. Okay, so your primary care physician, you may tell your primary care doc or nurse how depressed you're feeling, and they may keep a very small percentage of those patients trying to handle them, but their referrals, depending on where they're based themselves and what's available, is either going to be to a clinic that has psychologists and or psychiatrists, nurse practitioners. That's the most common thing that happens. What happens when they get to those clinics, it's really going to depend on who's the power structure of those clinics. I would say mostly, in most places, it's still going to be a medically oriented thing. So it's going to be medication with a nurse practitioner or a psychiatrist, and in a small percentage, they'll be referred out to, unless the patient specifically asks for it, to a psychologist who isn't going to, or a social worker who isn't going to be using med. There's also, faith-based counseling programs that people will try. Go talk to your minister, your rabbi, whatever, and see if he can help you deal with the problem. And that doesn't. I want to give more credibility to that because depression, the primary cause, other than the genetics and the biology, is stress. Just good old-fashioned or bad old-fashioned stress that comes out of workplace, interpersonal relationships, and some common sense counseling about how to handle stress or whatever. That can be very, very effective. Depends when it gets caught. If it's in fact, we talk about the diathesis, the genetic vulnerability, and that's very widespread. And then when you start superimposing that on chronic stress, you set in place a whole series of bad biological processes, which is now what we're finally beginning to understand, and drugs like Repostinol and so on are the key to undoing that change in biology.